The 14th volley tore through our port shield array, and I watched the last functional defense satellite above Sathari Prime go dark on my tactical display. 11 days. 11 days of the Drexari Dominion grinding their boots across our throat, and now the only thing standing between their guns and 6 million civilians on the surface below was my command ship and 10 wounded vessels held together by emergency welds and prayers. I am Commander Thiel Vasrin of the Galanthari Defense Fleet, and on that 11th morning of the siege, I was preparing to watch my world die. Shield grid at 7%, Commander. My first officer Dorith Mahani reported from the station to my left. His voice carried the flat calm of someone who had already accepted the outcome, but intended to face it standing. We cannot sustain another concentrated barrage. The grid will fold. I did not respond immediately. I was staring at the display that showed the Drexari formation. 83 warships arranged in a crescent around our orbital position, each one bristling with enough firepower to crack a continent. Our intelligence officer, Serevni, had identified the flagship at the center of their line. Warlord Kreth Voshan was aboard, the same commander who had burned the colonies at Dreveth and Sulani Point. He was not known for accepting surrenders. He was known for making examples. Ground situation, I said. Serevni pulled up the surface feeds. The Drexari had landed 40,000 troops on the northern continent 2 days prior. Our ground forces had been pushed back into the capital zone, a perimeter shrinking by the hour. Civilian shelters were at 300% capacity. Water recycling systems were failing. The hospitals had stopped triaging because there was no longer any meaningful distinction between the wounded who could be saved and those who could not. Estimated time to capital breach? I asked. At current rates of advance, 31 hours, Serevni said. If they commit their reserve landing force, which is staged on 3 of their troop carriers, that number drops to 14. 14 hours. I looked around my bridge at the officers who had served with me through all 11 days of this nightmare. They were exhausted. Some had not slept in 40 hours. Every one of them knew the mathematics as well as I did. We had 11 combat-capable ships. The Drexari had 83. Our ammunition reserves were at 19%. Our reactor cores were running above safe thermal limits because the cooling systems had been damaged on day 4, and we had never had a window to repair them. We had sent distress calls. That was the part that burned the most. We had followed every protocol, activated every diplomatic channel, invoked every alliance clause in our considerable portfolio of interstellar agreements. The responses had arrived over the following days, each one a masterclass in the art of expressing concern without providing assistance. The Melurian Concord had expressed deep concern and formed a diplomatic subcommittee to evaluate the situation and prepare a formal statement of solidarity. The subcommittee had requested additional documentation of the Drexari aggression for their records. They needed sensor logs. They needed formal depositions from military personnel. They needed a certified translation of the Drexari Declaration of Hostilities into the 3 official Melurian administrative languages. That statement, as far as I knew, was still being drafted, and our sensor logs were being filed by clerks in an office 1,500 light-years from the people those logs were supposed to help. The Oravathi League had pledged a relief fleet of 47 combat vessels, a serious force that could have made a difference. It was 19 days away, traveling at maximum sustainable FTL velocity through 3 separate relay corridors. I had done the mathematics repeatedly, hoping to find an error, hoping that I had miscounted the relay jumps or underestimated the Oravathi transit speed. I had not. By the time the relief fleet arrived, the siege would be ancient history, the occupation would be well established, and the Oravathi would be in the uncomfortable position of deciding whether to fight a fully entrenched Drexari garrison or issue a strongly worded diplomatic protest and go home. The Thenal sovereignty had not responded at all. Their ambassador to the Galanthari had quietly departed our capital city 6 days before the invasion began, citing personal health reasons. In the weeks that followed, intelligence analysts would determine that the Thenal had received advance notice of the Drexari invasion plan through back-channel communications and had decided that maintaining a neutral relationship with the Dominion was more valuable than honoring their loose affiliation with us. Their silence was the most honest response we received, because at least they did not pretend. There was one more rejection I had not told my crew about. I had sent a personal communication to Admiral Verthan Saul, the commander of the nearest independent military force, a mercenary fleet that occasionally contracted with planetary governments for defense operations. Verthan Saul had responded promptly. His fee for engaging an 83-ship Drexari fleet was 47 billion credits, payable in advance, with a 20% premium for operations against a Dominion-flagged enemy. Scithari Prime's entire annual economic output was 31 billion credits. I had not responded to his quote. Standard galactic response. Concern without commitment. Aid priced beyond reach. Promises calibrated to arrive after the dying was finished. I had served long enough to recognize the pattern, and on that 11th morning, the recognition did not make me angry. It made me tired. Commander, a voice said from the communication station. I turned to find Lieutenant Rashani looking at me with an expression I could not immediately categorize. She was young, barely 18 months out of the academy, and she had been running the communications desk since our senior comms officer had been killed when Deck 14 decompressed on Day 7. She had performed well beyond her experience level, and in the grinding desperation of the siege, I had started relying on her judgment more than protocol suggested I should. What is it, Lieutenant? I have a suggestion, Commander. It is probably a bad one. I almost smiled. Lieutenant, we are beyond the territory where bad suggestions are filtered out. Speak. She straightened in her chair, and I could see her organizing her thoughts, preparing for pushback. 8 years ago, the Galantheri signed a mutual defense compact with Earth. The bridge went quiet. Not silent, because there was always the background hum of damaged systems, and the occasional shudder of distant weapons fire against our failing shields. But the kind of quiet that happens when people stop breathing for a moment. Dorith spoke first. Earth. Yes, sir. The humans. Yes, sir. I watched Dorith's face cycle through several expressions, none of them encouraging. The humans were a species the galaxy had been politely ignoring for 4 decades. They had joined the interstellar community 41 years ago, which made them newcomers by any reasonable standard. They maintained a modest fleet, occupied their home system and 6 colonial outposts, and had fought exactly 1 notable military engagement in their entire spacefaring history, a border skirmish with the Fenrithi that had lasted 2 days and resulted in the Fenrithi withdrawing from a disputed asteroid belt. The general consensus was that the humans had won because the Fenrithi had not considered the asteroid belt worth a real fight. Humans were considered economically energetic. They traded aggressively, built efficient stations, and their engineering firms had earned a grudging respect for solving infrastructure problems that other species found tedious. But militarily, they were negligible. A single-system species with a small navy and no combat reputation. Asking them for help against the Drexari Dominion was like asking a shopkeeper to fight a wildfire. That compact, Serevni said carefully, was a ceremonial gesture, a diplomatic courtesy extended during trade negotiations. The humans wanted a transit corridor through our space, and we wanted access to their deuterium markets. The Mutual Defense Clause was standard boilerplate that nobody expected to be activated. But it is legally binding, Rashani said. Under the Interstellar Convention on Bilateral Compacts, Article 14, Section 3. I looked it up. I stared at her. She stared back. She was serious. Commander, Dorith said, his tone gentle in the way people are gentle when they think someone is wasting time. Even if the humans received our transmission, and even if they chose to honor the compact, they are 14 relay jumps from our position. The signal alone would take over an hour to reach them. And they would need to mobilize a fleet, plan an approach vector, transit through contested or neutral space. We are talking about weeks, not hours. I know, Rashani said, but everyone else has already said no, sir, or said nothing. Or said yes and sent help that will arrive after we are dead. She paused. I am not suggesting the humans will save us. I am suggesting that we have nothing to lose by asking. Nothing to lose. I turned those words over in my mind while staring at the Drexari formation on my display. 83 warships. 7% shields. 14 hours until the capital fell if the enemy committed reserves. 19 days until the nearest Allied fleet arrived, and a junior lieutenant suggesting we call a species that most of the galaxy considered barely relevant. "Draft the transmission," I said. Dorith looked at me sharply, but said nothing. Serevni's expression was carefully neutral. Rashani's hands were already moving across her console. The message went out on the compact frequency, a dedicated channel established when the defense agreement was signed, but never used since. Reshjani included everything: tactical data, fleet positions, enemy force composition, civilian population counts, infrastructure status, and an honest assessment that we had approximately 72 hours before total military collapse, and the Drexari began orbital bombardment of civilian centers. It was a thorough, professional, desperate transmission, and I authorized it knowing it was almost certainly a message in a bottle thrown into a very large ocean. "Transmission sent, Commander," Rashani said. "Signal is clean. Compact frequency is active." "Acknowledged," I said. I turned back to my tactical display and began reviewing our ammunition distribution for the next engagement, because the Drexari were not going to wait for a response that was never coming. The bridge settled back into the grim rhythm of a siege. Officers monitored decaying systems, calculated diminishing reserves, and tracked the slow tightening of the noose around our world. I could feel the weight of it pressing down on every person in the room, the knowledge that we were managing a defeat rather than fighting a battle. Dorith moved to my side and spoke quietly enough that the rest of the bridge would not hear. "Commander, you know what the human response time will tell us." "I know. If we receive nothing for 2 hours, we will know they needed the relay chain. If we receive nothing at all, we will know they chose not to respond." "I know, Dorith." He studied my face. "And if by some miracle we receive a response, what then? What can the humans actually do for us? Their largest combat vessel, according to our intelligence files, is roughly equivalent to one of our heavy frigates. They have no force projection capability. They have no experience operating in hostile space. They are, with all due respect to their economic contributions to the galactic community, not a military power." "I know all of that," I said. "And right now, they are the only species in the galaxy that has a legal obligation to help us, and they are the only species we have not asked. If that makes us foolish, then at least we will be completely foolish, rather than partially foolish." Dorith considered that for a moment, then nodded and returned to his station. It was the closest thing to a joke either of us had managed in 11 days. Another hour passed. The Drexari probed our flank with a squadron of fast destroyers, testing our response time, measuring the decay in our defensive coverage. We drove them back, but it cost us 2 missile corvettes and a significant portion of our remaining point defense ammunition. The corvettes were small ships, each crewed by 30 personnel, and when they broke apart under Drexari fire, I watched the escape pods tumble into the debris field and wondered how many of those 30-person crews would survive long enough to be recovered. Corell reported the engagement results with the professional detachment of a man who had stopped allowing himself to feel anything about casualty numbers. Ammunition expenditure: 14% of remaining point defense stores, 11% of remaining offensive missile reserves. At this rate of consumption, we can sustain 2 more engagements of this intensity before our magazines are functionally empty. 2 more engagements. After that, we would be warships in name only, hulls with engines and crews, and no ability to fight back. Kreth Voshin was counting our rounds as carefully as we were. He knew exactly how many more times we could bleed before the blood ran out. I was studying the damage reports from that engagement, calculating how to redistribute our remaining ammunition across the fleet in a way that would maximize the number of engagements we could sustain, when Rashani spoke again. "Commander," her voice had changed. The professional calm was still there, but underneath it was something else, something that made me look up immediately. "Commander, I am receiving a response on the compact frequency." I checked the chronometer on my display and felt the first crack appear in my understanding of the universe. The distress call had been sent 11 minutes ago. "That is not possible," Dorith said, and for once, his composure slipped. 14 relay jumps. The signal could not have reached Earth yet. It could not possibly have reached Earth and generated a response in 11 minutes. I am aware of that, sir, Rashani said. Her hands were trembling slightly, though her voice remained steady. But I am receiving a transmission on the compact frequency, authenticated with Earth's encryption protocols, and the signal header identifies the source as Solcom Actual. She paused. I do not know what Solcom is. Nobody on the bridge knew what Solcom was. Put it on the main display, I said. Rashani did. The message appeared in plain text across the central screen, where, moments before, I had been watching the slow death of my world. It was short. It contained no diplomatic preamble, no expression of sympathy, no request for clarification. It read, Compact acknowledged. Hold position. Do not surrender. Solcom Actual. I read it 3 times. Every officer on the bridge read it. Nobody spoke. The words were simple enough. Their implications were not. Hold position meant someone was coming. Do not surrender meant they expected to arrive before the situation became terminal. And the response time, 11 minutes across 14 relay jumps, meant something about the humans that none of us had ever suspected. Either they had communication infrastructure hidden across our region of space that nobody knew about, or they had been listening on frequencies they were never given access to. Both possibilities made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I looked at Rashani. She was staring at her console, with an expression that combined vindication with something deeper, something that looked like the first fragile stirring of hope in a person who had been forcing themselves not to feel it for 11 days. She had been the one to suggest calling Earth. She had been the one to argue for it when every senior officer dismissed the idea. And now, she was the one staring at a 6-word response that should not have been possible, that arrived in a time frame that violated everything we understood about interstellar communications, from a species that the galaxy had been politely underestimating for 4 decades. Commander, she said quietly, Solcom, I have searched every database on this ship. The designation does not appear in any Galanthari intelligence record. It does not appear in any Allied intelligence record we have access to. It does not appear in any public human military document. Whatever this organization is, the humans have never mentioned it to anyone. I absorbed that, an entire military command structure that had never been disclosed to any diplomatic partner in 41 years of interstellar relations. Not in treaty negotiations, not in military-to-military exchanges, not in intelligence sharing agreements. Hidden, completely and deliberately hidden, even from the species who had signed defense compacts with them. What do we do, Commander? Dorothy asked quietly. I looked at the Drexari fleet on my display, 83 warships. I looked at the human message, 4 sentences from an organization that did not officially exist. We hold position, I said, and we do not surrender. The next 5 hours were the longest of my life, and I have survived 3 wars. The Drexari tightened their formation, consolidating their siege line, while Warlord Kreth Voshin prepared what everyone on my bridge knew would be the final assault. Our shield grid was failing sector by sector, a slow cascade that my engineering teams could delay but not stop. Every patch they applied bought us minutes, not hours. At the 4-hour mark, Kreth Voshan broke his silence. His transmission came through on the general broadcast frequency, and his voice carried the lazy confidence of a predator that had cornered its prey and was simply deciding which angle to strike from. Commander Vasrin, he said, I have enjoyed your resistance. It has been more entertaining than most, but entertainment has diminishing returns, and my patience has reached its limit. You have 6 hours to power down your remaining vessels, lower your planetary shields, and prepare for ground surrender. If you do not comply, I will begin systematic bombardment of your civilian population centers, starting with the largest. I believe that would be the city of Korath Ven, population 2.3 million. He paused, and in that pause I could hear him smiling. 6 hours, Commander. Use them wisely. The transmission ended. I sat in my command chair and stared at the display, while my officers waited for my response. 6 hours. The Drexari did not make idle threats about orbital bombardment. Kreth Voshin had burned civilian cities before, and had been promoted for it. If I did not surrender, 2.3 million people in Korath Ven would die, followed by every other population center on the planet. And somewhere in the void, the humans had sent 4 sentences. I made a decision that I have questioned every day since, even though it turned out to be the right one. I chose to gamble with 2.3 million lives on the word of a species I did not understand, based on a message I could not fully explain. Open a channel to the Drexhari flagship, I said. Dorith's head snapped toward me. Commander, you are not going to surrender. No, I said. I am going to negotiate. I had no intention of negotiating in good faith. I had no concessions to offer, and no leverage to offer them with. But I knew something about Kreth Voshan. From studying his previous campaigns, he was arrogant, and arrogant commanders enjoy the performance of dominance almost as much as dominance itself. If I could engage him in a negotiation, even a fraudulent one, I could buy time. The channel opened. I straightened in my chair and addressed the warlord with every ounce of diplomatic formality I could summon. Warlord Voshan, I said, I have received your ultimatum. I wish to discuss terms. Voshan's image appeared on my screen. He was tall for a Drexari, with the characteristic ridge of bone plating along his jaw that marked their officer caste. His eyes were sharp, calculating, and amused. He had expected me to grovel, and I was giving him exactly what he wanted. Terms, he repeated, tasting the word. You are in no position to discuss terms, Commander. You are in a position to accept them. With respect, Warlord, any transfer of authority over a populated world requires procedural compliance under the Galactic Occupation Protocols. My government would need to formally authorize any surrender, which requires a communication window to our Senate on the homeworld. I am requesting a 24-hour extension to facilitate that process. It was nonsense. Elegant nonsense, dressed in enough bureaucratic language to force Voshan to consider it rather than dismiss it outright. And it worked. At least partially, because Voshan was not only arrogant, but procedurally minded. The Drexari Dominion operated on a rigid hierarchy of protocols and authorizations, and even their most brutal commanders preferred their conquests to be administratively tidy. You are stalling, Voshan said. I am complying with interstellar law, I replied. A surrender that does not meet procedural requirements can be challenged in the Concord courts and potentially reversed. I am certain you do not want your conquest invalidated on a technicality. Voshan studied me through the screen. I held his gaze and kept my breathing steady, and hoped he could not see the sweat running down the back of my neck. Your knowledge of legal procedure is convenient, Commander, he said. I wonder if you showed this much interest in protocol before your fleet was reduced to scrap. Protocol exists for situations exactly like this one, Warlord. Orderly transitions benefit both parties. He leaned forward. Let me be clear about something. I have occupied 37 worlds. On 11 of those worlds, the defenders attempted to use procedural delays as a stalling tactic. I recognized it every time. I am recognizing it now. He paused. But I am also a patient man, when patience serves my interests. An orderly surrender saves me ammunition and reduces the administrative burden of occupation. So I will indulge your request, within limits. You have 12 hours, he continued. Not 24. 12. And Commander, let me add a personal condition. If I detect any attempt to evacuate leadership personnel, military assets, or classified materials during that window, the bombardment begins immediately, not in 6 hours. Immediately I will target the civilian shelters first, because that will eliminate any remaining incentive for you to resist. The casual precision of that threat made my blood cold. He was not posturing. He was describing a contingency he had already planned for, in the same tone he might use to discuss supply requisitions. Understood, Warlord, I said. One more thing. His voice dropped half a register. Do not mistake my patience for uncertainty, Commander. I know you are stalling. I am allowing it, because it costs me nothing, and because watching you pretend to negotiate amuses me. But the amusement has a shelf life. 12 hours. After that, the only negotiation will be between my torpedoes and your cities. The channel closed. Dorith let out a breath he had been holding for the entire exchange. 12 hours, he said. You bought us 12 hours. If he honors it, I replied. which he might not. He knows exactly what I am doing. Then why did he agree? Because he is arrogant enough to think it does not matter. He believes the outcome is predetermined regardless of how many hours I waste. I looked at the human message still glowing on my secondary display. Let us hope he is wrong about that. The next 90 minutes passed in a grinding tension that made the previous 11 days feel almost peaceful by comparison. At least during the siege, the enemy's intentions had been clear. Now I was suspended between two possibilities, one in which the humans were coming, and one in which they were not, and I had staked 6 million lives on a bet I could not verify. It does not matter, Serevny said from the intelligence station, and something in his voice made every head on the bridge turn. Commander, I need you to see something. I walked to his station. His displays showed the Drexhari fleet formation, the same 83-ship crescent that had been strangling us for 11 days. But something was different. At the edges of the formation, in the rear echelon where the supply ships and logistics vessels held position, there was movement. They're supply tenders, Serevny said. 7 of them have activated their FTL drives. Jumping out? No, Commander. Just warming the drives, keeping them at standby threshold. He looked up at me. Supply ships do not warm their drives during an active siege. There is no tactical reason for it, unless they are preparing for a fast departure. I stared at the display. 7 supply ships with their drives humming, ready to jump at a moment's notice. In the Drexari military doctrine, supply vessels only entered departure readiness under 2 conditions: planned withdrawal or imminent threat to the logistics line. There is more, Serevny continued. He pulled up a communications analysis. Encrypted Drexari traffic has increased by 400% in the last 90 minutes. The volume is extraordinary. This is not routine siege communication. Something is happening in their network, and it has nothing to do with us. I looked at the human message still displayed on the corner of my screen. Compact acknowledged. Hold position. Do not surrender. Something was happening. I could feel it the way you feel, a storm approaching before the sky changes color. The air on the bridge had shifted. My officers could sense it too. A vibration at the edge of perception, a change in the rhythm of the siege that none of us could name, but all of us could feel. Keep monitoring, I told Serevny. Everything, every frequency, every emission, every anomaly. If a Drexari supply clerk sneezes, I want to know about it. I walked back to my command chair, and sat down, and stared at 83 warships, and waited for something I did not understand to happen. 3 hours into the extended ultimatum window, it started. A Drexari heavy cruiser on the outer edge of the siege formation, one of their command-tier vessels designated by Serevny as Target 16, broke formation. It did not reposition, it did not advance. It spun on its axis, aligned with a jump vector that pointed away from Sithari Prime, and engaged its FTL drive. It vanished from our sensors in a flash of displaced radiation. Target 16 has jumped, my tactical officer Carell reported, his voice tight with confusion. No authorization signal detected on the Drexari command net. That ship left without orders. Before I could respond, a second vessel broke formation. Then a destroyer escort group, 3 ships moving in concert, peeling away from the siege line and jumping to FTL in rapid succession. Within 4 minutes, 6 Drexhari warships had abandoned their positions. What is happening? Dorith said. Serevny, I said. Talk to me. Serevny's hands were flying across his console, cycling through intercepted transmissions, trying to find anything in the Drexari communications avalanche that was unencrypted or poorly encrypted enough to read. His face was pale. I have something, he said. An unencrypted burst from a Drexari border outpost. It appears to be an emergency relay, sent in the clear because proper encryption protocols were not followed. He looked at me. Commander, it says, human vessels detected in the Vreth corridor. Repeat, human vessels in the Vreth corridor. Number unknown. They are not responding to hails. The Vreth corridor. I knew that name. Every military officer in this sector of the galaxy knew that name. It was the primary transit route between Drexhari core territory and their industrial heartland. It was 700 light-years from Sithari Prime, deep inside Drexhari sovereign space. That makes no sense, Dorith said. If the humans sent a fleet to help us, why would it be 700 light-years from the battle? Wait, Serevni said. Another intercept appeared on his display, then another, then 6 more in rapid succession. His face went from pale to ashen. Commander, I am pulling intercepts from across the Drexhari communication network. Multiple sources, multiple locations. He began reading them aloud, and with each one, the temperature on the bridge seemed to drop another degree. Human vessels detected at the Krathini Supply Depot. Drexhari Garrison Command, requesting identification and intent. No response from human ships. Human formation identified near the Second Fleet anchorage at Voshan's Deep. 17 vessels, configuration unknown. They are holding position at weapons range and refusing all communication. Emergency transmission from the Voshani shipyard system. Human ships have dropped out of FTL within sensor range of the orbital construction platforms. They are not moving. They are not communicating. Requesting immediate instructions. Contact report from the Dreth Septis Fuel Depot. Human corvettes, estimated 8 to 12 vessels, have taken position along the primary supply artery. No hostile action, no response to hails. Emergency relay from Drexhari Colonial Authority 12. Governor requests military escort for civilian evacuation. Human vessels are visible from the primary observation platform of the administrative capital. Population is in distress. Fragment from what appears to be a Drexhari military intelligence analyst, sent to Fleet Command through a damaged encryption channel. Assessment reads, the human deployment pattern suggests comprehensive prior intelligence on Drexhari military infrastructure. They have targeted every Tier 1 and Tier 2 strategic asset in the Dominion. This level of targeting accuracy requires years of intelligence collection. Our counterintelligence division has no record of any human intelligence operation within Dominion space. Assessment confidence, 0. We do not understand what we are seeing. Serevni stopped reading and looked up at me. The bridge was silent, except for the hum of dying systems and the distant rumble of a siege that was suddenly, inexplicably, losing its shape. That last intercept, the one from the intelligence analyst, crystallized something that had been forming in my mind since the first fragment. The humans had not simply appeared at random Drexhari installations. They had appeared at every strategically significant installation, every shipyard, every fleet anchorage, every supply depot, every fuel reserve, every communication hub. The targeting was precise. It was comprehensive. And it demonstrated a level of intelligence penetration that the Drexhari counterintelligence establishment had completely failed to detect. The humans had been mapping the Drexhari military infrastructure for years, possibly decades, building a comprehensive picture of every strategic asset, every vulnerability, every pressure point in the Dominion's military architecture, and they had done it so quietly that the Drexhari did not even know they had been studied. I understood, standing there in the blue glow of Serevni's intelligence displays, reading those intercepted transmissions one after another. I understood what the humans had done, and the understanding hit me like a physical blow. They had not sent a fleet to Sithari Prime. They had sent dozens of flotillas, simultaneously, to every critical military installation, supply depot, shipyard, fuel reserve, and fleet anchorage across the entire Drexhari Dominion. Not attacking, not threatening, just appearing, parking, sitting in weapons range and refusing to say a word. The silence was the message. The presence was the threat. The humans had reached into the Drexhari Dominion's chest and placed their hand around its beating heart and said nothing at all, because nothing needed to be said. Continue your siege. See what happens to everything you have ever built. They did not send a rescue, I said, and my voice sounded strange to my own ears. They sent a message, directly to every nerve ending in the Drexhari military infrastructure. Dorith was gripping the edge of Serevni's console with both hands, his knuckles pale. The logistics of this, he said. Commander, do you understand what we are looking at? These flotillas appeared simultaneously across hundreds of light-years of Drexhari space. You cannot coordinate that in real time. You cannot scramble ships to those positions in hours. Those flotillas were already deployed. They were already in position before we sent our distress call. The humans had assets pre-staged across the entire Drexhari Dominion, waiting for exactly this scenario. How long? Carell asked from Tactical, his voice hollow. How long have they been there? Nobody answered, because the answer was too large to contemplate in the middle of a crisis. Months, years possibly. Human ships hidden in the dark spaces of Drexari territory, maintained by supply chains nobody detected, crewed by personnel who rotated through tours of duty in deep concealment. The infrastructure required was enormous. The discipline required was inhuman. More intercepts flooded in. Serevni barely had time to read one before the next arrived. A Drexari mining colony on the outer rim is reporting 4 human vessels in stationary orbit. The colony administrator states that his population of 60,000 civilians is in panic, and he has no military assets to respond. The Drexari Naval Academy at Kresoth is reporting human ships holding position at the system perimeter. The Commandant is requesting immediate guidance on whether this constitutes an act of war. A transmission fragment from what appears to be a Drexari intelligence analyst, stationed at their central command hub. The fragment reads, "Our sensor records show no approach signatures. The human ships did not transit through any monitored corridor. They are simply present. We do not know how they arrived." That last intercept made me sit down. No approach signatures. The human ships had not been detected entering Drexari space through any of the monitored FTL corridors. They had either used an approach method that was invisible to Drexari sensors, or they had been in position for so long that their arrival predated the current sensor logs. Either explanation was terrifying. "Commander," Carell said from Tactical, 12 more Drexari ships are breaking formation. The siege line is destabilizing. I watched them go. Warships peeling away from Sithari Prime like leaves torn from a branch. Their commanders no longer concerned with our dying world, because their own worlds were suddenly, impossibly, at risk. Every ship that left reduced the siege force. Every ship that left was a captain who had received word that human vessels were sitting quietly next to something they could not afford to lose. The mathematics of the siege had not changed, because we had gained strength. It had changed because the Drexari had discovered that the cost of staying was no longer limited to ammunition and time. The cost of staying was now measured in shipyards and supply depots and fleet anchorages, the entire infrastructure that made their empire capable of waging war. Warlord Kreth Voshan's flagship remained at the center of the formation, but the crescent was disintegrating around him. His 83 ships were down to 60, then 54, then 47. Each departure was an unauthorized act of self-preservation, a captain choosing to protect their own installations rather than prosecute someone else's conquest. Rashani turned from her communications console. "Commander, I am monitoring the Drexari command frequency. Voshan is transmitting orders to hold formation. His ships are not complying." "Would you comply?" Dorith asked quietly. "I would not. If I were a Drexari captain and I learned that unknown hostile vessels were parked within weapons range of the shipyard where my fleet had been built, or the supply depot that sustained my crew, or the anchorage where my reserve forces were sleeping, I would not stay at Sithari Prime either. Not for Voshan. Not for anyone." The ultimatum window was still ticking. Voshan had not spoken to us. The bombardment had not begun. The most feared warlord in the Drexari Dominion was sitting in his flagship, watching his siege force dissolve, and, for what might have been the first time in his career, he did not know what to do. "Commander," Serevni said, pulling another intercept. "A Drexari cruiser captain, the one commanding their picket line near the Drevith Nebula, transmitted this to Voshan's flagship in partially encrypted format." He read the fragment aloud. "Warlord, I have 16 human vessels holding stations 6,000 kilometers from the Drevith Munitions Reserve. They are running active targeting systems. My garrison has 42 personnel and a single patrol cutter. I require reinforcement or authorization to withdraw. Please advise immediately." No response from Voshan's flagship had been intercepted, perhaps because there was no good response to give. Every reinforcement Voshan sent to protect a Drexari installation was a ship pulled from the siege of Sithari Prime, and every ship pulled from the siege weakened his position here. The humans had created a problem with no solution, a strategic trap where every possible response made the situation worse. "Another intercept," Serevni continued, his voice now carrying a note of something close to disbelief. From the Drexhari 7th Patrol Group, stationed along their spinward frontier, the patrol commander reports 23 human vessels distributed across 5 locations in the frontier zone. He notes that the human ships arrived within minutes of each other and that their coordination suggests real-time communication across distances that should require relay infrastructure the humans are not known to possess. Not known to possess. Those 4 words hung in the air like a verdict. Every assumption the galaxy had made about human capability was unraveling in real time, and the Drexamari were learning the truth the hardest way possible. Another transmission arrived on the compact frequency. Rashani read it aloud, and her voice cracked on the second word. Phase 1 complete. Maintain position. Solcom actual. Phase 1. I sank into my command chair and stared at those 2 words. Phase 1 complete. Which meant there was a Phase 2, which meant that the simultaneous deployment of human flotillas across the entire Drexari Dominion, an operation of staggering logistical complexity that had been executed within hours of our distress call, was only the beginning. What are they? Dorith whispered. It was not a rhetorical question. He was genuinely asking, because the species we thought we knew, the modest newcomers with their small fleet, and their single notable engagement, that species could not have done what we were watching unfold on our screens. I did not have an answer. I did not think anyone in the galaxy had an answer. Not yet. I just sat in my chair and watched the Drexari siege crumble, and tried to understand how everything I thought I knew about the humans had been so completely, so catastrophically wrong. Hour 7. The Drexari fleet carrier at the center of their formation, the largest vessel on the siege line, began recalling its fighter wings. The recovery operations were hasty, fighters being tractored in without proper approach sequencing, pilots being pulled from combat patrol and ordered to dock immediately. This was not a tactical rotation. This was a ship preparing to leave. The siege line had degraded from 83 ships to 39. More than half of Vashan's armada had abandoned the operation, each captain making the individual calculation that their home systems were more important than this conquest. The formation that had been strangling Sithari Prime for 11 days was full of holes now, gaps where warships had been that were filled with nothing but empty space, and the residual heat of their departure. Warlord Vashan has not transmitted in 4 hours, Serevni reported. His flagship's communication arrays are active, but all traffic is encrypted on Dominion military channels. He is talking to his command structure, not to us. I imagined what those conversations sounded like. Reports flooding in from every corner of Drexari space, garrison commanders demanding reinforcements, shipyard administrators reporting unknown human vessels sitting silently at their doorstep, logistics officers calculating the catastrophic supply chain disruptions that would follow if the humans decided to act on their positioning. Voshan had started this siege as a predator. Now he was a commander watching his entire strategic landscape transform beneath his feet, while he sat motionless above a world he no longer had the force to threaten. At hour 7 and 42 minutes, Serevni detected an FTL signature approaching Sithari Prime. My blood went cold because my first thought was Drexari reinforcements, but Serevni shook his head before I could voice the fear. The approach vector is wrong, he said. This signature is coming from the Malurian border, Galactic south-southeast. He frowned. That route makes no tactical sense for a Drexari force. It is not aligned with any of their staging areas or transit corridors. Then who? The answer arrived 40 seconds later, when the FTL signature resolved on our long-range sensors. 9 ships, small by galactic standards, none larger than a medium cruiser by hull classification. But their emission profiles made Serevni lean back in his chair and rub his eyes as if his instruments were malfunctioning. Commander, he said slowly, those ships are broadcasting power signatures that exceed their hull size by a factor of 11. 11, Dorith repeated. A ship that size should output approximately 400 terawatts at maximum combat rating. These vessels are registering at 4.4 thousand terawatts each. That is physically inconsistent with their hull mass and volume. He paused. Either my sensors are broken, or those ships are running technology that does not exist in any database I have access to. The 9 ships dropped out of FTL in a formation so precise it looked choreographed. They took a position directly between the Drexari fleet and Sithari Prime, placing themselves in the line of fire with the calm deliberation of someone stepping between a bully and a child. 9 ships against 39. Then they spoke. An open broadcast on all frequencies, the first human voice I had ever heard in a military context. It was female, steady, and carried the particular kind of authority that does not need volume to be terrifying. Drexari Dominion Forces. This is Captain Grace Ellison, Task Force Obsidian, United Earth Naval Command. You are conducting hostile operations against a compact protected world. You have 90 minutes to begin withdrawal of all military assets from the Sithari system. There will not be a second notice. The transmission ended. No negotiation. No diplomatic framing. No mention of consequences. Because the consequences were implicit in every word and in the 4,000 terawatt power signatures radiating from 9 ships that should not have been able to generate a fraction of that output. I expected the Drexari to respond. I expected Warlord Voshan, who had burned colonies and shattered fleets and built his career on overwhelming force, to laugh at 9 ships issuing demands to his 39. I expected defiance. What I got was silence. Voshan did not respond. Not publicly, not privately, not on any channel that Serevni could intercept. The most aggressive military commander in the Drexari Dominion received an ultimatum from a force 1/4 his size and said nothing. Because he had spent the last several hours watching human flotillas appear simultaneously across every strategic asset his nation possessed. Because he had seen his own fleet melt away as captains fled to protect their home stations. Because whatever intelligence the Drexari military had compiled on human capabilities over the past 41 years had been revealed, in the space of a single afternoon, to be completely worthless. He did not know what those 9 ships could do, and for the first time in his career, Kreth Voshan was afraid of what he did not know. The 90-minute window that Captain Ellison had given the Drexari began ticking, and I watched it from my bridge the way a person watches a fuse burn toward something they cannot predict. The 9 human ships sat in their formation, engines humming at power levels that made my sensors flicker with uncertainty, and waited. The Drexari fleet, what remained of it, sat in their formation and waited too. 2 forces staring at each other across a void that was charged with enough potential energy to rewrite the strategic balance of the galaxy. Serevni intercepted fragments of Voshan's communications to his remaining captains. The warlord was trying to hold his force together, ordering ships to maintain position, threatening consequences for unauthorized departures, reminding his officers of the honor codes that bound Drexari commanders to their sworn missions. But his words had the desperate quality of a man trying to plug holes in a dam with his fingers, while the water rose around him. Captain of the destroyer Vreth Kalani has transmitted to the flagship, Serevni reported. He is requesting permission to withdraw. He states that human vessels have been detected near the Kalani shipworks, which is his family's ancestral industrial holding. I heard that, and felt a strange pang of something almost like sympathy, not for the Drexari, who had spent 11 days trying to bomb my civilians, but for the individual captains, caught between obedience and survival. Each one of them was facing a choice that had no good answer. Stay, and risk losing everything at home, or leave, and face the consequences of disobeying the most powerful warlord in their military. One by one, they chose home. Hour 9. A Drexari destroyer on the perimeter turned, aligned with an outbound jump vector, and engaged its FTL drive. Then 2 more. Then a cruiser group of 3 vessels that broke away together, their captains apparently having coordinated among themselves before making their decision. The retreat began not as a coordinated withdrawal, but as a cascade of individual decisions, each captain looking at those 9 impossible ships and making the same calculation. Whatever Voshan's orders were, they were not worth dying for. Not today. Not against this. Voshan tried to maintain discipline. Serevni intercepted fragments of his encrypted transmissions, enough to piece together that the warlord was ordering his remaining ships to hold position, threatening courts-martial and dishonorable discharge, invoking every clause of the Drexari military code that he could bring to bear. But honor codes do not work when the ground beneath them has vanished, and Voshan's ground had been dissolving since the first human flotilla appeared in the Vreth corridor. Ship after ship peeled away. 39 became 28. 28 became 19. 19 became 12. I watched the siege line thin and felt the first real stirring of hope I had experienced in 11 days. A sensation so unfamiliar after so many days of despair that I did not immediately recognize it for what it was. We were going to survive. The realization settled over me slowly, like warmth returning to frozen limbs. The human task force did not move. They did not fire. They did not pursue the departing Drexari ships, or broadcast triumphant messages, or celebrate the crumbling of the siege. They sat in their formation between the dying siege and my wounded world, and watched with the patience of a species that had been waiting for this moment for a very long time, and had no intention of rushing it. At hour 10, Vashan made his final transmission. It was brief, stripped of the arrogant confidence that had characterized every communication since the siege began. He addressed Captain Ellison directly. "Human Commander, I am conducting a tactical repositioning of Drexari forces from the Sathari system. This action is not a withdrawal, it is a strategic redeployment." Ellison's response was 3 words. "Repositioning acknowledged, Warlord." She let him have the fiction. She let him call it a redeployment instead of a retreat, because she did not care about his pride. She cared about the 6 million civilians on the surface below, and every Drexari ship that jumped out of the system was one less gun pointed at their homes. The remaining Drexari ships did not need Voshan's permission to leave. They had been waiting for the fiction, waiting for their warlord to provide them with a face-saving framework that they could cite when the inevitable courts of inquiry convened. Voshan had called it a tactical repositioning, and that was enough. The word of the warlord made their departures officially authorized, retroactively legitimate, historically defensible. It did not matter that everyone involved knew the truth. What mattered was that the forms had been observed. Within 20 minutes, the last 12 ships departed in rapid succession, some jumping so hastily that their FTL drives left energy ghosts on our sensor arrays that lingered for several minutes after the ships themselves had vanished. The final vessel to leave was a light destroyer that had been positioned on the far flank of the siege line. It had been so far from the center of the formation that I suspected its captain had been waiting not for Voshan's authorization, but for confirmation that the route out of the system was clear of human ships. By hour 11, the last Drexari vessel spun on its axis and vanished into FTL. The siege line was empty. The formation that had been crushing us for 11 days was gone, replaced by nothing but starlight and the fading radiation trails of 83 warships that had been driven from the field without a single shot fired. Sathari Prime's skies were clear. The orbital bombardment never came. 6 million people were alive because a junior lieutenant had suggested calling a species nobody took seriously, and that species had responded in 11 minutes and dismantled a military operation across an entire enemy empire in less than half a day. I sat in my command chair and breathed. Just breathed. Around me, my officers were doing the same. Some of them crying, some of them laughing, most of them simply staring at empty displays where enemy warships had been, trying to process the fact that they were going to survive a day they had all expected to be their last. Rashani was sobbing at her communications console, the tears running freely down her face while her hands continued to work, because even in the grip of the most intense emotional release of her young life, she was still monitoring the compact frequency. She was the one who had suggested calling Earth. She was the one who had drafted the transmission. She was the one who had argued for it when every senior officer on the bridge had thought it was a waste of time. And she was the one who had been right when everyone else, including me, had been wrong. I walked to her station and put my hand on her shoulder. She looked up at me with eyes that were red and wet and shining with something that was not quite joy, but was close enough to its neighborhood. "Well done, Lieutenant," I said. She nodded and wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and turned back to her console. And that was the extent of the ceremony, because there would be time for formal recognition later. But right now, there was still a world to save, even if the immediate threat was gone. The surface shelters needed to be evacuated, the wounded needed medical attention, the damaged infrastructure needed emergency stabilization. The work of recovery was just beginning. But first, I needed to talk to the humans. After a long moment, I opened a channel to the human task force. Captain Ellison's face appeared on my screen. She was younger than I had expected, with dark hair pulled back and calm brown eyes that gave nothing away. Behind her, I could see the bridge of her vessel, clean and well lit, and filled with officers who moved with the quiet efficiency of people who were exactly where they expected to be, doing exactly what they had trained to do. "Captain Ellison," I said, "I am Commander Thiel Vasrin, Galanthari Defense Fleet. On behalf of my world and my people, I want to express our profound gratitude for your intervention." "Commander Vasrin," she said, "no gratitude is necessary. You invoked the compact. We keep our agreements." Such simple words. We keep our agreements. Said without emphasis, without pride, without any indication that what had just happened was remarkable. As if responding to a distress call in 11 minutes and deploying forces across an entire enemy empire within hours was simply what you did when an ally asked for help, as if it were normal. "Captain," I said, because I could not stop myself, "how did you do this?" Ellison looked at me through the screen, and for just a moment, something shifted behind her eyes. Not quite amusement, not quite warning, something in between. "We keep our agreements," she said again, and the channel closed. The human task force remained in orbit above Centauri Prime for 72 hours. During that time, they helped coordinate medical relief operations, provided engineering assistance to our damaged orbital infrastructure, and facilitated the delivery of emergency supplies that arrived from human logistics vessels I had not even known were in the region. They were professional, efficient, and relentlessly helpful, in a way that made every interaction feel slightly surreal. Captain Ellison met with me twice during those 3 days, both times in person aboard my command ship. She was courteous, competent, and completely impenetrable. She answered questions about immediate logistics and relief coordination with detailed precision. She answered questions about how the humans had accomplished what they accomplished, with polite deflection and changes of subject. On the 4th day, Task Force Obsidian departed. 9 ships that had ended an 11-day siege without firing a weapon powered up their impossible drives and vanished into FTL, leaving behind a world that owed its survival to a species it had never taken seriously. That was when I began asking questions, not the grateful questions of a survivor, but the hard, uncomfortable questions of a military officer who had just witnessed something that should not have been possible. The first question was the response time, 11 minutes. Our distress call had been transmitted on the compact frequency, a dedicated channel that required relay infrastructure to propagate across interstellar distances. 14 relay jumps separated Centauri Prime from Earth. Even at the theoretical maximum signal speed through relay networks, the round-trip communication time should have been over 2 hours. The humans had replied in 11 minutes. I assigned Serevny to investigate, and what he found made my stomach turn. Over the following weeks, his intelligence team discovered evidence of a network of deep space listening posts scattered across Galanthari space and the surrounding regions. Hidden in asteroid fields, buried in the electromagnetic noise of dead systems, tucked into the gravitational shadows of brown dwarfs where no one would think to look, human listening posts, dozens of them, positioned to intercept any transmission in our region of space within minutes of broadcast. The humans had not needed 14 relay jumps. They had been listening from next door, for years, possibly decades, without telling anyone. Serevny mapped the network as thoroughly as he could with the data available. He identified at least 16 listening posts in Galanthari space alone, positioned at strategic communication choke points where they could intercept the widest possible range of transmissions with the smallest number of installations. The posts were small, barely larger than a shuttle, running on power cells designed for decades of unattended operation. Their sensor arrays were passive, which meant they did not emit signals that could be detected by routine sweeps. They simply listened, recorded, and transmitted through a communications backbone that did not use the standard galactic relay infrastructure. When I asked Serevny how the humans had built and deployed 16 installations in our space without our knowledge, he gave me a look that combined professional admiration with personal discomfort. "Commander, each of these posts was placed in a location that our patrol routes do not cover. Not because the locations are difficult to reach, but because they are boring. Dead asteroids, empty cometary belts, gravitational dead zones between binary pairs, locations that our survey teams cataloged decades ago as containing nothing of interest and never revisited. The humans had hidden their ears in the places we had decided were too uninteresting to check. It was so simple it was elegant. It was so elegant it was infuriating. Further investigation, conducted in cooperation with Malurian and Oravathi intelligence services, revealed that the listening network was not limited to Galanthari space. It extended to the territory of every species with whom the humans had any form of diplomatic relationship. The Malurians found posts in their outer systems. The Oravathi found them in their asteroid belts. Even the Thenol, who had maintained only the most minimal diplomatic contact with Earth, discovered evidence of at least 3 human listening installations in their border regions. The humans had been listening to everyone, every ally, every partner, every acquaintance. From the moment each relationship began, they had started watching and listening, building a surveillance and early warning network of extraordinary scope, maintained in perfect secrecy, for what appeared to be the entirety of their 41-year membership in the interstellar community. The second question was the simultaneous deployment. Within hours of our distress call, human flotillas had appeared at every critical Drexari military installation across their entire territory. The coordination required for such an operation was beyond anything in our military doctrine. You could not scramble that many ships to that many precise locations in that time frame. It was logistically impossible unless the ships were already in position before the call was made. And that was the answer. Serevni's team, working with intelligence contacts in 3 allied navies, slowly pieced together the truth. The humans maintained pre-positioned rapid response groups in concealed locations throughout the galaxy, not just near their own territory, but near every signatory of every compact and treaty they had ever signed. They called it the Tripwire Doctrine, a strategic framework built on a single premise. If you wait until the crisis begins to move your assets into position, you are already too late. The humans had decided, decades ago, that they would never be too late. So they moved their assets into position before the crisis existed. They had been doing it for years. Quiet deployments to hidden staging areas in dead systems and empty sectors. Ships rotating through concealed positions near every potential flashpoint their analysts had identified. A permanent state of readiness that was invisible because nobody thought to look for a minor species in places where a minor species had no reason to be. The scope of it was staggering. Serevni estimated that the humans maintained at least 40 pre-positioned groups across the galaxy at any given time. 40 groups of ships, hidden in the dark, waiting for a call that might never come. The logistical cost alone would have consumed a significant fraction of any normal military budget. The personnel commitment was equally remarkable. Thousands of crew members serving rotational tours of duty in deep concealment, maintaining combat readiness in the isolation of empty space, training for scenarios that might never materialize. The humans had been bearing that cost in silence for decades, not as a burden, but as a commitment. They signed compacts and treaties and agreements, and then they quietly built the infrastructure to honor those commitments at a moment's notice, and they never told anyone they were doing it. When I read Serevni's report on the Tripwire Doctrine, I sat in my quarters for a long time and thought about what it meant. Not strategically. I understood the strategic implications well enough. They were obvious to any military officer. I thought about what it meant about the humans as a species. They had decided that their word was not merely a diplomatic convention, but an operational requirement. They had decided that promising to defend an ally was meaningless without the capability to actually do it. And they had built that capability at enormous cost, in total secrecy, with no guarantee that it would ever be needed. That is not normal behavior. That is not how species typically approach mutual defense agreements. Most species sign compacts as diplomatic gestures and hope they are never tested. The humans signed compacts as operational triggers and spent years making sure they were ready when the trigger was pulled. Serevni raised a point during his briefing that I have not been able to stop thinking about since. He said, "Commander, consider the implications of what the Tripwire Doctrine means for the human budget. They are maintaining pre-positioned forces near every ally and every potential threat. If they have 53 treaty relationships across the galaxy, and if each relationship requires a minimum of 2 concealed response groups to cover the most likely threat scenarios, That is over 100 groups of ships hidden in deep space at any given time. Each group requires supply rotations, crew rotations, maintenance cycles, and communication infrastructure. The cost of maintaining this network is almost certainly larger than their visible military budget, which means their actual military expenditure is at least double what they report in treaty compliance filings. He let that sink in for a moment before continuing. And if they are spending twice their reported budget on military operations, then every economic model we have built for the human economy is wrong. We have been underestimating their industrial capacity, their shipbuilding capacity, their personnel numbers, and their resource extraction capability for decades. The entire picture is wrong, not at the margins, at the foundation. I nodded slowly, which means the humans are not just militarily stronger than we thought. They are economically stronger, industrially stronger, technologically stronger. Everything about them is bigger than the picture they showed us. Yes, Commander, everything. The third question was the one that kept me awake at night, and it was about the ships. When our analysts reviewed the sensor data from Task Force Obsidian's 9 vessels, they found combat system specifications that did not match any known human military configuration. The power output, the shield harmonics, the weapons mount configurations, the drive signatures. None of it appeared in any intelligence database maintained by any species in the galactic community. The humans had revealed 9 ships, and those 9 ships were something nobody had ever seen before. Our chief technical analyst spent 3 weeks studying the sensor data and produced a report that I read 4 times because I could not believe it the first 3. The human ships were running a reactor configuration that generated 11 times the power output of any comparable vessel in known space. Their shield systems operated on frequencies that our sensors could barely detect, let alone classify. Their weapons mounts were configured in patterns that suggested offensive capabilities our models could not predict, and their FTL drives had produced approach signatures that indicated transit speeds far exceeding the known maximum for vessels of their mass class. The humans had not just hidden their military strength, they had hidden an entire generation of military technology. The ships they showed to foreign observers, the ones that filled their public fleet registries and appeared at diplomatic parades, were apparently not the ships they actually relied on. Those ships were somewhere else, in the dark, running systems that the rest of the galaxy did not know existed. I found myself wondering how many ships they actually had. The public fleet registry listed approximately 300 vessels, a modest number for a species with 6 colonial outposts. But Task Force Obsidian's 9 ships did not appear in any registry. The flotillas that had appeared across Drexhari space, dozens of groups with an estimated total of over 200 vessels, did not appear in any registry. If the humans maintained both a public fleet for show and a concealed fleet for actual operations, the true size of their navy was unknown. And if their concealed ships were all running the same advanced technology as Task Force Obsidian, then the true capability of their navy was not just unknown, but unknowable with available data. I contacted colleagues in the Melurian Naval Intelligence Service. I spoke with analysts in the Oravathi Defense Ministry. I reached out to a Thenal intelligence officer I had known since before the war. Every one of them reported the same quiet, spreading realization. The humans had been deliberately, systematically, and comprehensively underestimated. Not by accident, by design. An analyst named Korath Vey, a Melurian, who had been studying human military development for a research institution on their homeworld, published a classified assessment 3 weeks after the siege ended. I obtained a copy through channels I will not describe. Its conclusions were devastating in their clarity. The humans, Vey wrote, had spent 41 years presenting themselves as a modest, economically focused minor power, with limited military capability, and no strategic ambitions beyond their immediate neighborhood. Every interaction, every trade negotiation, every diplomatic exchange, every military exercise conducted in view of foreign observers had been carefully calibrated to reinforce this perception. Their public fleet was real, but intentionally unimpressive. Their military doctrine, as presented to Allied intelligence services, was defensive and conservative. Their strategic communications emphasized commerce, cultural exchange, and cooperative development. And behind that carefully maintained facade, they had built something else entirely, a listening network that spanned Allied space. Pre-positioned rapid response forces, hidden across the galaxy. Ship technology that exceeded anything in the known databases by margins that suggested decades of covert development. A military infrastructure designed not for defense, but for projection. The ability to place decisive force at any point in the galaxy within hours. They had not been hiding their strength because they were afraid. They had been hiding it because hidden strength is more effective than visible strength. A species that the galaxy fears is a species the galaxy prepares for. Arms races begin. Counter-alliances form. Intelligence services mobilize. The act of being feared creates the very opposition that being feared is supposed to prevent. The humans had understood this fundamental paradox of military power and had solved it in the only way it can be solved, by making sure nobody knew there was anything to fear. Vey's paper included a line that has stayed with me since I first read it. She wrote, "The humans did not deceive the galaxy about their capabilities, out of malice or duplicity. They deceived us out of strategic clarity. A species that is overlooked faces no opposition. A species that faces no opposition has the freedom to build without interference. And a species that builds without interference, for 4 decades, will eventually possess capabilities that no amount of opposition could have prevented." I attended a post-crisis briefing 6 weeks after the siege ended. The room was full of senior Galanthari military officers, intelligence officials, and diplomatic advisors, along with observers from the Melurian, Orivathi, and Thenel intelligence services, who had traveled significant distances to attend. The mood was somber despite the victory. There is a particular kind of anxiety that comes from winning through the intervention of a force you did not know existed, because the same force that saved you could just as easily threaten you, and you would never see it coming. Admiral Korath Sulani presided, a veteran of 40 years of service, who had seen more battles than anyone in the room. She was not a woman who softened uncomfortable truths. The briefing covered the tactical details of the siege and the human intervention. It reviewed Serevni's intelligence findings on the listening network. It presented the preliminary data on the tripwire doctrine. It displayed the sensor analysis of Task Force Obsidian's technology. And when the last presentation was finished, Admiral Sulani stood at the front of the room and looked around at the assembled officers and diplomats and intelligence chiefs with an expression that combined professional resolve with genuine unease. "We have spent the last 6 weeks cataloging what the humans revealed during the Sithari Prime intervention," she said. "A listening network spanning Allied space, pre-positioned forces across dozens of concealed locations, ship technology that exceeds our best estimates by at least a generation. A strategic doctrine built on decades of preparation we never detected." She paused to let the weight of the summary settle on the room. "Now, if this is what they showed us when we asked for help, when they had every reason to demonstrate capability, what have they not shown anyone?" The room was silent, not the awkward silence of people who do not have an answer, but the heavy silence of people who suspect the answer and are afraid of it. I thought about the human message. Phase 1 complete. Nobody had ever explained what Phase 2 was. In the weeks since the siege, through every intelligence channel available to me, through every diplomatic contact and military liaison and back-channel conversation, I had tried to learn what came after Phase 1. Nobody knew. The humans, when asked, simply smiled and changed the subject. I had asked Captain Ellison directly during our second meeting aboard the Sorenthal. She had been reviewing medical supply manifests with me, coordinating the distribution of human relief materials to the worst affected zones on the surface. It was a practical conversation, the kind of working meeting that allies conduct during a crisis, and I had waited until the substantive discussion was finished before raising the question. "Captain," I had said, "your initial communication referenced Phase 1. What was Phase 2? She had looked up from the manifests with an expression that was not quite a smile, but occupied the same territory. Phase 2 was the contingency for a scenario in which the Drexari did not withdraw voluntarily. And what did that contingency involve? Respectfully, Commander, that falls outside the scope of our current operational coordination. Captain, as the military commander of the world your forces are currently orbiting, I would argue that understanding the full scope of your strategic doctrine falls very much within the scope of our coordination." Ellison had studied me for a moment with those calm brown eyes, and I had the distinct impression that she was weighing several possible responses, discarding most of them, and selecting the one that revealed the least, while still being technically truthful. Phase 2 would have ensured the safety of Sci Prime regardless of Warlord Voshin's decisions, she said. The specifics remain classified under United Earth Naval Command operational security protocols. I can tell you that it was not necessary, which is the outcome we preferred. The outcome they preferred. Which implied that the alternative outcome, the one that involved Phase 2, was something they were prepared for but did not want. Something that would have resolved the siege definitively but in a manner they considered less desirable than a voluntary withdrawal. I did not push further. I recognized the wall when I hit it, and I knew that pressing against it would yield nothing, except a polite repetition of the same non-answer. But the conversation confirmed something I had suspected. Phase 2 was not a bluff. It was a real operational plan, fully developed and ready to execute, that the humans had been prepared to implement if their strategic positioning had failed to convince the Drexari to leave. What could 9 ships have done against 39 that would have ensured the safety of a planet? I have spent many hours considering that question, and every answer I construct is more unsettling than the last. I thought about Daniel Shaw, the human ambassador who had negotiated the original defense compact 8 years ago. I had met him once, at a reception during the trade negotiations. He had been pleasant, unremarkable, and easy to overlook. A diplomat from a minor species, doing minor species things. At the time, I had barely registered his presence. Now I wondered what he had been doing while I was not paying attention. Now I wondered what all of them had been doing while the galaxy politely ignored them. Every human diplomat I had ever encountered, every trade representative, every cultural attaché, every engineer who had helped build a station or repair a relay, every single one of them had been part of a species that was simultaneously maintaining the largest covert military infrastructure in galactic history, while smiling and discussing commodity prices. Were they all aware of it? Did every human citizen know that their species was quietly building invisible armies across the galaxy? Or was it a secret, held by a select few, a military and intelligence establishment that operated behind the pleasant facade with the same discipline and patience that characterized everything else the humans did? I did not know. The question disturbed me either way. A species where everyone knows and nobody talks is frightening. A species where the military operates independently at this scale is also frightening. There was no version of the answer that made me comfortable. The galaxy has thousands of species that want to be feared. They build massive fleets, and stage military parades, and broadcast their strength on every frequency, because they believe that fear is the foundation of power. I have dealt with dozens of such species over my career. Their posturing is tiresome, but predictable. You know what they are, because they spend enormous energy making sure you know. The humans are different. The humans are the only species I have ever encountered that wanted to be underestimated. They spent 41 years building a reputation as irrelevant. They cultivated insignificance, the way other species cultivate fear. They made themselves invisible, not through stealth technology or intelligence operations, but through the simple, devastating strategy of being boring. And when someone they had made a promise to was dying, they moved with a speed and precision and scale that revealed the gap between what they appeared to be and what they actually were. They did it in hours. They did it without firing a shot, and then they went back to being boring. That, more than the ships, more than the tripwire doctrine, more than the listening posts and the impossible response time, is what terrifies me. Not what they did, what they chose not to show. I keep a copy of their message on my desk. 4 sentences that changed the course of a war and rewrote my understanding of the galaxy. Compact acknowledged. Hold position. Do not surrender. Solcom actual. We keep our agreements, Captain Ellison said. As if it were simple, as if it were obvious, as if the most terrifying military operation in modern galactic history were nothing more than the natural consequence of keeping a promise. I believe her. I believe the humans keep their agreements, and I believe that somewhere in the vast, quiet spaces between the stars, in places nobody thinks to look, the humans are keeping other promises too. Promises nobody knows about. Promises nobody asked them to make. Phase 1 complete. I have made my peace with not knowing what Phase 2 is. I have made my peace with the fact that the species I once dismissed as economically energetic shopkeepers could end a war in an afternoon and then politely excuse themselves as if they had somewhere more important to be. But I have not made my peace with one thing, and I do not think I ever will. 41 years. They were among us for 41 years, trading with us, dining with us, signing compacts with us, attending our conferences and shaking our hands, and smiling their unremarkable smiles. And the whole time, every single day, they were building something we could not see, in places we would not look, for reasons we still do not understand. And when I asked Captain Ellison how they did it, she looked at me with those calm brown eyes and said 5 words that I hear in my dreams. We keep our agreements. I think about those words every night, not because they are comforting, although they should be, because we are their allies and the agreement protects us. I think about them because of what they imply about the humans, a species that will hide in plain sight for 4 decades, building invisible armies and silent networks, and impossible ships, all to honor a piece of paper that everyone else considered ceremonial. What kind of species does that? What kind of species can do that? I do not have an answer. But I know this much. The next time someone in my presence dismisses the humans as a minor species, I will not argue with them. I will not correct them. I will not share what I know. I will simply remember the 11 minutes, and the silence, and the look in Krethvoshen's eyes when he realized that everything he thought he knew about the galaxy was wrong. And I will be grateful, deeply and permanently grateful, that the humans choose to keep their agreements. Because somewhere out there, in the dark spaces between the stars, the humans are watching, they are listening, they are waiting. And they have made promises to species who do not even know those promises exist. Phase 1 complete. I wonder, sometimes, how many other species out there have signed a piece of paper with the humans and filed it away as a diplomatic formality. How many other worlds have a compact or a treaty, or an agreement, sitting in a dusty archive, unread and unconsidered, while the humans quietly build the infrastructure to honor it? How many other species will discover, on their worst day, in their darkest hour, when every other ally has abandoned them and every other option has failed, that a bottle they threw into the ocean was caught by hands that were already waiting for it? I hope they never need to find out, but if they do, I know what the humans will say. We keep our agreements. And heaven help the species that stands between the humans and a promise they intend to keep.